The blistering heat of the summer sun scorched the dusty streets of Silver Reef, Utah. As 19-year-old, Alina Palmer clutched the worn handle of her small valise, trying desperately to keep her face expressionless, despite the humiliation burning through her. The year was 1878, and Alina found herself standing on a crude wooden platform at the Washington County Fair, her stepmother Gertrude's fingers digging into her arm like talons as potential buyers assessed her worth. Fine young woman here. Strong back, good with a needle, and cooks better than most. Gertrude's voice rang out across the fairgrounds, carrying the same false sweetness she'd perfected during her 2-year marriage to Alina's late father. $500, and she's yours a fair price for a ready-made wife or household help. Alina's cheeks burned with shame as men circled the platform, eyeing her like cattle. She'd known Gertrude resented her, had endured months of cruelty after her beloved father passed from consumption last winter, but she'd never imagined it would come to this. The homestead had fallen into disrepair, debts had mounted, and Gertrude had made it clear that Alina was nothing but a burden she intended to profit from. "Turn around, girl. Let the gentlemen see what they're bidding on," Gertrude hissed, forcing Alina to rotate slowly. From the corner of her eye, Alina noticed a tall figure pushing through the crowd. Unlike the others, mostly older men with greedy eyes or stern-faced farmers seeking unpaid help, this man moved with purpose. His broad shoulders were draped in a dust-covered duster, a worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "I'll take her," the stranger's deep voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "Name your price." Gertrude's eyes gleamed with avarice. $500, sir. She's worth every penny." The tall stranger stepped closer, and Alina caught her first clear glimpse of his face. He couldn't have been more than 25, with sharp features weathered by sun and wind, piercing blue eyes, and a strong jawline shadowed with several days' growth of beard. His expression remained unreadable as he reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. "This isn't right," he said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Selling a person ain't legal, not since the war ended." "I'm merely arranging a marriage, sir," Gertrude countered smoothly. "A common practice in these parts. Against her will." The stranger's gaze shifted to Alina, taking in her faded blue dress, the tension in her shoulders, and the barely concealed fear in her eyes. "Is this what you want, miss?" Alina hesitated, aware of Gertrude's fingers tightening painfully around her arm. The homestead was gone, sold to cover her father's debts. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to. But the alternative, being sold to one of these men, made her blood run cold. "No," she whispered, then louder, "No, it isn't." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The stranger nodded once, then turned his attention back to Gertrude. "I'll give you 200 for her freedom, not ownership," he said firmly, "and that's my final offer." 300, Gertrude countered quickly. 250, and I don't report this to Sheriff Buchanan. The steel in his voice left no room for negotiation. The mention of the sheriff made Gertrude's face pale. With visible reluctance, she snatched the money from the stranger's outstretched hand and released her grip on Alina. "Take her then." "Good riddance," she spat, stuffing the money into her reticule. "Never was worth the trouble of raising her." Alina's throat tightened. Though Gertrude had only been her stepmother for 2 years, the words stung nonetheless. She watched as the woman who had made her life miserable since her father's death turned and disappeared into the crowd without a backward glance. "Thank you," Alina managed, turning to her unexpected savior. Up close, she noted a small scar that cut through his right eyebrow and the sun-bleached streaks in his otherwise dark brown hair. "But I'm afraid I have no way to repay you." "Wasn't expecting repayment," he said, his voice softer now. The name's Caleb Grayson. I've got a ranch about 20 miles north of here. Could use some help around the place if you're willing to work. Room and board in exchange." He paused, seeming to sense her hesitation. "Or I can just give you enough money to get to Salt Lake City if you'd prefer." Eleanor weighed her options quickly. She had no relatives, no prospects, and precious little money of her own. A job with room and board was more than she could have hoped for under the circumstances. "I accept your offer of employment, Mr. Grayson," she said, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin. "And I promise I won't be a burden." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Never thought you would be." He gestured toward a wagon at the edge of the fairgrounds. "We should head out if we want to make it back before dark." As they walked through the fairgrounds, Eleanor felt the weight of curious stares. She heard the whispers speculations about what Caleb Grayson wanted with her and kept her gaze fixed firmly ahead. Whatever his motives, they couldn't be worse than what awaited her had he not intervened. Caleb helped her into the wagon, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. A large bay gelding snorted and stamped impatiently. "Easy, Thunder," Caleb murmured to the horse before turning to Eleanor. "It's a rough road, especially after dark. You might want to hold on." With a flick of the reins, they pulled away from Silver Reef, and the nightmare Eleanor had barely escaped. As the town receded behind them, she allowed herself a single glance back, a silent farewell to the life she had known. "Your stepmother," Caleb said after they'd traveled in silence for several miles. "She always been that way." "No," Eleanor replied softly. "She was. Different when my father was alive, or perhaps she just hid it better." She stared at her hands folded in her lap. "After he died, there was no reason to pretend anymore." Caleb nodded but didn't press further. The wagon rattled over the uneven terrain, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Desert scrub gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and piñon pines as they climbed higher into the foothills of the distant mountains. "It's beautiful out here," Eleanor commented, breaking the silence. "That it is," Caleb agreed. "Harsh, too. Takes a certain kind of person to make it in these parts." As they traveled, Eleanor observed her rescuer from the corner of her eye. His hands were calloused, his forearms corded with lean muscle as he handled the reins. There was a quiet confidence in the way he sat, alert to their surroundings yet seemingly at ease. She wondered what had prompted him to intervene on her behalf, but feared asking too many questions too soon. The sun was beginning to set when Caleb finally pointed to a distant cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley. "That's it. Grayson Ranch." Even from a distance, Eleanor could see it was a modest operation, nothing like some of the vast cattle empires she'd heard about further east. A two-story farmhouse stood at the center, flanked by a large barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Fields of what looked like alfalfa stretched to the north, while cattle grazed on the hillsides beyond. "It's not much compared to some spreads," Caleb said, as if reading her thoughts, "but it's mine. Been in the family for 3 generations." "It looks lovely," Eleanor replied honestly. After months of uncertainty, the sight of the ranch with its solid buildings and clear purpose filled her with a tentative hope. They approached the ranch house as the last rays of sunlight painted the valley in gold and crimson. An older woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're back early," she called, then paused when she noticed Eleanor. "And you've brought company." "Martha, this is Miss Eleanor Palmer," Caleb said as he brought the wagon to a stop. "She'll be staying with us for a while, helping around the place." He turned to Eleanor. "Martha Jensen has been our housekeeper since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. She keeps everything running smoothly." Martha's eyebrows rose slightly, but she offered Eleanor a warm smile. "Well, We can certainly use another pair of hands around here. Come inside, dear. You look like you could use a hot meal and a rest. Caleb helped Alina down from the wagon. I'll see to the horses and join you ladies shortly. Martha led Alina into the house, which was simple but comfortable, with solid pine furniture and colorful woven rugs covering the plank floors. The spare room upstairs is all made up, Martha said, leading the way. Used to be Caleb's sister's room before she married and moved to Denver. She glanced at Alina's small valise. Is that all you have, child? Yes, madam, Alina replied. I had to leave in a hurry. Something in Martha's expression suggested she understood more than Alina was saying. Well, we'll just have to remedy that soon. For now, wash up and come down for supper. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks. Left alone in the small but tidy bedroom, Alina sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. That morning, she'd awakened to Gertrude's announcement that they were attending the county fair. By nightfall, she was in a stranger's home, miles from everything familiar. Yet for the first time in months, she felt something close to safe. After washing her face and hands in the basin provided, Alina made her way downstairs to find Caleb and Martha already seated at the kitchen table. A hearty stew bubbled in a pot on the stove, and the scent of freshly baked bread filled the air. Just in time, Martha said, gesturing for Alina to join them. Sit down before it gets cold. As they ate, Martha kept the conversation light, asking Alina general questions about her skills and interests without prying into her circumstances. Caleb remained mostly silent, though Alina occasionally caught him watching her with an unreadable expression. Alina's handy with a needle, she tells me, Martha said to Caleb. And she can cook. I was thinking she could help me with the household duties, maybe take over some of the mending you've been letting pile up. Caleb nodded. Whatever works best. There's plenty to do around here. He turned to Alina. Do you ride, Miss Palmer? Please call me Alina, she said. And yes, though it's been a while, my father taught me when I was young. Good, that'll make things easier. He stood, collecting his empty plate. I should check on the new calf in the north pasture before turning in. Martha will show you the ropes tomorrow. After he left, Martha began clearing the table. Alina rose to help her. He doesn't say much, does he? She ventured. Martha's lips twitched in a half-smile. Caleb's always been a man of few words, even more so since he came back from the war. She paused, studying Alina's face. He's a good man, though, one of the best I know. The war, he fought in the Civil War, Alina asked, surprised. Caleb seemed too young. Joined up near the end, lied about his age. He was just 16 when he left, Martha replied, her voice softening with old concern. Came back different, quieter. Took over the ranch when his pa died 2 years ago. Alina absorbed this information as she helped wash and dry the dishes. It explained something of the gravity she sensed in him, the watchful way he carried himself. How did he? Alina hesitated, unsure how to phrase her question without seeming ungrateful. Martha saved her the trouble. How did he happen to bring you here? She shook her head. Caleb doesn't share his reasons for most things, but I'd wager it has something to do with his sister Lydia. She was about your age when she got into a bad situation with a man who promised her the world and delivered nothing but heartache. She patted Alina's hand. Whatever your circumstances, you're safe here. That much I can promise you. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Alina listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whisper of wind through the pines, the occasional creak of the house settling. Her mind replayed the events of the day, lingering on the memory of Caleb Grayson's steady gaze and the quiet authority with which he'd faced down Gertrude. Safe. The word Martha had used echoed in her mind. It had been so long since she'd felt that way that she hardly recognized the sensation. Alina awoke to the sound of movement downstairs and pale dawn light filtering through the curtains. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a faded green calico that had once belonged to her mother, and made her way downstairs. Martha was already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. She looked up with a smile as Alina entered. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well." "Better than I have in months," Alina admitted. "How can I help?" "You can start by frying up some bacon and eggs for breakfast. Caleb's been out since before dawn and he'll be hungry when he comes in." Alina set to work, grateful for the familiar task. By the time Caleb entered through the back door, stomping dust from his boots, she had a substantial breakfast laid out on the table. "Morning," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. His eyes registered mild surprise at the sight of the meal. "You didn't have to do all this." "It's the least I can do," Alina replied. "I'm here to work after all." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." He washed his hands at the basin by the door, then joined her at the table. Martha declined to join them, saying she needed to get the bread in the oven. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Caleb spoke. "I was thinking you might want to ride out with me this afternoon, see the rest of the ranch. If you're going to be staying here, you should know the layout." "I'd like that," Alina said, pleased at the prospect of getting outside after months of being confined to the increasingly dilapidated homestead under Gertrude's watchful eye. Caleb nodded. "Good. After lunch, then." He finished his breakfast and stood. "For now, I'm sure Martha has plenty for you to do." Indeed, the morning passed quickly as Martha showed Alina the routines of the household. There were chickens to feed, eggs to collect, laundry to wash, and a seemingly endless pile of mending that Caleb had indeed been neglecting. By the time lunch was over, Alina had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. When Caleb appeared at the back door after the midday meal, he was leading 2 saddled horses, his bay gelding Thunder and a smaller dappled mare. "This is Willow," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She's gentle but spirited. Should suit you if you're as good a rider as you say." Alina approached the horse slowly, letting her sniff her outstretched hand before stroking her velvet nose. "She's beautiful." Caleb gave her a boost into the saddle, his hand strong and sure at her waist. Alina felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the brief contact, but quickly dismissed it as she adjusted her seat and gathered the reins. "Remember how to handle her?" Caleb asked, swinging easily onto Thunder's back. Alina nodded, the familiar feel of a horse beneath her bringing back memories of happier days riding with her father across their small property. "I remember." They set out at an easy walk, Caleb pointing out landmarks and boundaries as they rode. The Grayson Ranch, she learned, encompassed about 2,000 acres, not vast by Western standards, but significant nonetheless. The land varied from the fertile valley where the house stood to rocky hillsides where cattle grazed on sparse vegetation. "Water's the key out here," Caleb explained as they stopped by a small creek that ran through the property. "We've got 3 year-round sources this creek, a spring up in the north pasture, and a small lake on the western boundary. Makes this land more valuable than most in these parts." Alina watched as a pair of deer drank cautiously from the creek, then bounded away at their approach. "It's so peaceful here." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "That's why my grandfather chose it. Said he'd seen enough of mankind's troubles during the Mexican War to last a lifetime." As they continued their tour, Alina began to understand the rhythm of the ranch. They passed fields where 2 ranch hands were cutting alfalfa, stopped to check on a small herd of cattle with their spring calves, and visited the western boundary where Caleb pointed out the neighboring property, owned by a family named Donovan. "They've been pushing to buy this place for years," he commented. "Old man Donovan thinks he should own the whole valley." "And you don't want to sell?" Alina asked. Caleb glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Would you sell your family's legacy?" "No," she said quietly, thinking of the homestead her father had built with his own hands, now lost to Gertrude's mismanagement. "I wouldn't." They were returning to the ranch house, the afternoon sun low on the horizon, when Caleb suddenly rained thunder to a stop. Alina followed his gaze to where dust rose from the road leading to the ranch. "Riders coming," he said, his voice tight. "3 of them." Without another word, he turned thunder toward the approaching riders, and Alina followed, curious despite the tension she sensed in him. As they drew closer, she could make out 3 men on horseback, moving at a leisurely pace. "Donovan," Caleb muttered, and Alina understood this must be the neighbor he'd mentioned. The lead rider was an older man with iron-gray hair and a florid complexion, flanked by 2 younger men who shared his broad build and heavy features. "Grayson," the older man called as they met on the road. His gaze shifted to Alina, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "And who might this lovely young lady be?" "Miss Palmer," Caleb replied curtly. "She's helping at the ranch." His tone made it clear he considered this explanation sufficient. "What brings you this way, Donovan?" "Just being neighborly," Donovan replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thought I'd ride over and see if you'd reconsidered my offer. Price of beef's down again. Might be a good time to sell out to someone who can weather the lean times." "Ranch isn't for sale," Caleb said flatly. "Same answer as last month and the month before that." One of the younger men, Donovan's son, Alina presumed, leaned forward in his saddle. "You're sitting on the best water rights in the county, Grayson. Doesn't make sense for a small operation like yours to control them." "James," the older Donovan warned, though his expression suggested he agreed with the sentiment. He turned back to Caleb. "Well, the offer stands. 20,000 for the whole spread, more than fair." "Not interested," Caleb repeated. "Now if you'll excuse us, we've got work to do." Donovan's jovial facade slipped momentarily, revealing something harder beneath. "You think about it, Grayson. Times are changing. Small ranchers like you are getting squeezed out all across the territory." His gaze shifted to Alina again. "Miss Palmer, a pleasure. Perhaps we'll meet again under more hospitable circumstances." With that, the 3 men rode on, heading toward the main road that led back to town. Alina watched them go, troubled by the undercurrent of hostility she'd sensed. "Has it always been that way between your families?" she asked as they resumed their journey back to the ranch house. Caleb's jaw tightened. "It got worse after my father died. Donovan thinks I'm too young and inexperienced to hold onto the place." He glanced at her. "He's wrong." "I believe you," Alina said simply, and was rewarded with a brief, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. By the time they returned to the ranch, the sun was setting. Martha had dinner waiting, a savory rabbit stew with dumplings that reminded Alina of her mother's cooking. After they'd eaten, Caleb excused himself to check on a horse that had been favoring one leg, leaving Alina and Martha to clean up. "I saw the Donovans riding this way earlier," Martha commented as she washed the dishes. "Causing trouble again, I suppose." "Mr. Donovan seems very determined to buy this ranch," Alina observed, drying each plate carefully. Martha made a disapproving sound. "That man has been trying to take this land since before Caleb's father died. Claims he needs the water rights for his cattle, but what he really wants is control of the whole valley." She handed Alina another plate. "Between you and me, I think he's got financial backing from some Eastern investors who want to establish a much larger operation. Caleb won't sell, though. No, Martha agreed with evident satisfaction. This land is in his blood. His grandfather helped survey this territory after the war with Mexico. His father expanded the operation. Caleb won't be the one to let it go. She paused, studying Alina. You rode out with him today? Yes, he showed me the property. Martha nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. That's a good sign. Caleb doesn't usually take much interest in the hired help beyond giving orders. Before Alina could ask what she meant, the back door opened and Caleb returned, bringing with him the scent of horses and night air. Mare's leg looks better, he announced. Just a stone bruise, I think. He glanced between them. Everything all right here, just fine, Martha assured him. Alina's been a tremendous help today. Good, Caleb said, his gaze lingering on Alina for a moment before he turned away. I'll be in the study if you need me. After he left, Martha finished the last of the dishes and wiped her hands. I'm turning in early tonight. These old bones aren't what they used to be. She patted Alina's shoulder. Don't stay up too late, dear. Morning comes early around here. Left alone in the kitchen, Alina found herself drawn to the warm lamplight spilling from beneath the closed study door. She hesitated, then knocked softly. Come in, Caleb called. She opened the door to find him seated at a large oak desk, account books spread before him. The study was lined with bookshelves filled with volumes on animal husbandry, agriculture, and what appeared to be history and literature as well. I'm sorry to disturb you, Alina said. I just wanted to thank you again for today, for everything. Caleb set down his pencil. No need for thanks. You're earning your keep. Even so. She stepped further into the room, drawn by the unexpected sight of so many books. I didn't expect a cattle ranch to have such a library. A hint of pride crossed his face. My mother was a school teacher before she married my father. She believed education was important, even out here. He gestured to the shelves. Feel free to borrow anything that interests you. Alina moved to examine the titles more closely, her fingers trailing over leather-bound spines. I've always loved reading. My father used to trade with passing peddlers for books when I was younger. She pulled out a volume of Tennyson's poetry. This was one of his favorites. Mine too, Caleb admitted, surprising her. Though I haven't had much time for poetry lately. Alina opened the book, finding a familiar passage. "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all," she read softly, thinking of her father. Caleb was watching her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "You believe that?" he asked. She considered the question seriously. "I think so. The loss hurts terribly, but the memories, they're worth something, aren't they?" "Maybe," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. He turned back to his ledgers. "It's getting late. You should get some rest." Alina recognized the dismissal and placed the book back on the shelf. "Good night, Mr. Grayson." "Caleb," he corrected, glancing up at her. "If we're going to be working together, you might as well use my name." "Good night, Caleb," she amended with a small smile. "I'll see you in the morning." The days that followed settled into a rhythm as Alina found her place within the routine of the ranch. She rose before dawn to help Martha prepare breakfast, spent mornings attending to household duties, and often rode out in the afternoons to help with lighter ranch work. Caleb, she discovered, ran a tight but fair operation with just 3 full-time hands, brothers named Tom and Frank Miller, and an older man everyone called Doc, though he had no medical training. To Alina's surprise, Caleb began seeking her company during these afternoon rides, explaining aspects of ranching she'd never known despite growing up in the territory. He showed her how to check cattle for signs of illness, taught her to identify the native plants and their uses, and even began instructing her in basic roping techniques. "You've got a good eye," he commented one afternoon, as she successfully lassoed a fence post on her third try. "Not many people pick it up that quickly." "I had a good teacher," she replied, flushing with pleasure at the rare compliment. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd come to value his good opinion more than she cared to admit. Caleb's mouth quirked in that almost smile she was beginning to recognize. "Flattery won't get you out of practice," he said, handing the rope back to her. Again. As June gave way to July, the heat intensified. The days were filled with endless work irrigation to manage, cattle to move to higher pastures where the grass remained green, vegetables to harvest and preserve from the kitchen garden. Despite the exhaustion that came with each day's labor, Alina found herself happier than she'd been since before her father's illness. One particularly scorching afternoon, Caleb suggested they ride to the lake on the western boundary to check water levels. The small lake, fed by mountain streams, was crucial to the ranch's survival during the dry summer months. "It's lower than I'd like," Caleb observed as they dismounted by the shore, "but should hold through August if we're careful." Alina knelt to dip her fingers in the cool water, tempted to wade in despite the impropriety. As if reading her thoughts, Caleb gestured to a stand of cottonwoods that provided deep shade along one side of the lake. "There's a good swimming hole over there," he said. "My sister and I used to cool off here all the time when we were kids." He hesitated, then added, "You're welcome to take a dip if you'd like. I can keep watch from a distance." The offer was made with such careful propriety that Alina had to smile. "That's very thoughtful, but I don't have anything suitable to wear." "Ah," he said, looking momentarily embarrassed. "Of course." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the soft lapping of water against the shore and the distant call of a hawk. Alina was acutely aware of how alone they were, miles from the ranch house or any other people. In the weeks she'd lived at the ranch, Caleb had been unfailingly respectful, never once making her uncomfortable despite the unusual circumstances of her arrival. "I never properly asked what brought you to the county fair that day," she said finally. "It seems like fate that you happened to be there." Caleb's expression grew serious. "Not fate, Martha sent me." At her confused look, he continued. "She heard rumors in town about a woman planning to sell her stepdaughter at the fair. Said I should go see if there was any truth to it." He shrugged slightly. "Martha has a nose for trouble, especially where young women are concerned." "Then I owe her even more thanks than I realized," Alina said softly. "She's fond of you," Caleb replied. "Says you've brought life back to the place." Alina felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "The ranch has been good for me too. She hesitated, then decided to speak plainly. "I wasn't sure what would become of me after my father died. Gertrude made it clear I wasn't welcome, but I had nowhere else to go." "Your mother," Caleb asked gently, "died when I was 12. It was just my father and me until he married Gertrude 3 years ago." She traced patterns in the dust with a twig. "He thought he was securing my future. Instead, he left me at her mercy." Caleb's jaw tightened. No one deserves to be treated as property. Something in his tone made Alina wonder if he was thinking of more than just her situation. "You fought in the war," she said. It wasn't a question. Martha had confirmed it. He nodded, his gaze distant. "Near the end, saw the aftermath of what treating humans as property does to both the owned and the owners." He looked at her directly. "It's not something I could stand by and watch happen to you or anyone else." The intensity in his blue eyes made Alina's breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might say more, might reach for her hand or move closer. Instead, he stood abruptly. "We should head back. Storm's brewing." He nodded toward the western horizon where dark clouds were indeed gathering. Those summer storms can move in fast. Alina glanced at the sky, disappointed yet relieved by the change in subject. The afternoon had taken an unexpectedly intimate turn, and she wasn't entirely sure how to navigate these new feelings stirring within her, a warm, fluttering sensation, whenever Caleb was near, a lingering awareness of his movements, the way her pulse quickened when their hands accidentally brushed. They rode hard on the return journey, racing the approaching storm. The first fat raindrops began to fall as they reached the ranch, and by the time they'd stabled the horses, the sky had opened in a torrential downpour. They made a dash for the house, arriving at the back door thoroughly soaked. Martha took one look at them and hurried to fetch towels. "Land sakes, you two look like drowned rats," she fussed, handing them each a towel. "Get dried off before you catch your death." Caleb ran the towel roughly over his hair, which now curled damply against his neck. His wet shirt clung to the broad planes of his chest and shoulders, and Alina found herself staring before quickly averting her gaze. "I'll, go change," she murmured, hurrying toward the stairs. In her room, Alina peeled off her wet clothing and changed into her only other dress, a simple blue cotton that had begun to fray at the cuffs. The garments she'd arrived with were showing their age, patched and mended by her own hand multiple times. She hadn't wanted to ask for anything, but the reality of her limited wardrobe was becoming problematic. When she returned downstairs, she found Martha alone in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "Caleb's gone to check the barn roof for leaks," the older woman explained. "That west corner's been giving us trouble." She eyed Alina's dress with a knowing look. "We need to get you some proper clothes, child. Can't have you working in those threadbare things much longer." Alina flushed. "I didn't want to be a burden. I've been saving from my wages to buy fabric." "Nonsense," Martha interrupted firmly. "Caleb's sister left plenty of things when she moved to Denver. She was about your size. I've been meaning to suggest it, but didn't want to presume." She wiped her hands on her apron. "After dinner, we'll go through the trunk in the attic." No sense in good clothes going to waste when you need them. True to her word, after the evening meal, Martha led Alina to the attic where a large cedar chest contained Lydia Grayson's abandoned wardrobe. To Alina's amazement, the chest held not just everyday work dresses but several nicer gowns as well. "Lydia always did like pretty things," Martha commented as Alina held up a forest green dress with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "These haven't been worn in 2 years. She'd want them put to good use." "Are you sure Caleb wouldn't mind?" Alina asked hesitantly. "Mind what?" came Caleb's voice from the attic stairs. He appeared in the doorway, ducking his head beneath the low beams. Martha answered for her. "Alina needs proper clothes. I suggested she might use some of Lydia's things rather than spending her wages on new ones." Caleb's eyes moved from the open trunk to the green dress Alina still held, and something unreadable crossed his face. "Lydia would approve," he said after a moment. "She always said clothes should be worn, not stored away." He nodded once as if coming to a decision. "Take whatever you can use. They're just gathering dust here." "Thank you," Alina said, touched by the generosity. "I'll take good care of them." "I know you will," he replied, and there was a warmth in his voice that made her heartbeat quicken. He cleared his throat. "Martha, when you have a moment, I need to discuss the supply order for town tomorrow." After he left, Martha helped Alina select several everyday dresses, a warm shawl, a Sunday dress for church, and even a pair of riding skirts that would make her afternoon work with Caleb more practical. The clothing would need some alterations, but Martha assured her they could manage that easily enough over the next few evenings. "Lydia was always a bit taller," Martha commented as she pinned the hem of a brown work dress. but otherwise these fit you well." Alina stood patiently as Martha worked, her mind returning to the expression on Caleb's face when he'd seen her holding his sister's dress. "He misses her, doesn't he?" "Lydia," Martha nodded. "They were close, especially after their mother passed. Just the two of them and their father for many years." She secured another pin. "When she married and moved away, it hit him hard, though he'd never admit it. That's Caleb keeps everything locked up tight inside." "Why didn't he marry?" Alina asked before she could stop herself. "I mean, he must have had opportunities." Martha straightened, a knowing glint in her eye. "There was a girl before the war, Caroline Mendenhall, daughter of the banker in Cedar City. Pretty thing, but high-strung." She shook her head. "When Caleb came back from fighting, changed like he was, she couldn't handle it. Broke things off and married a lawyer from Salt Lake City within the year." "That's awful," Alina said softly. "It was for the best," Martha replied firmly. "She wasn't cut out for ranch life, and Caleb needs someone who understands the land, who appreciates the value of what he's building here." She gave Alina a pointed look that made her blush. "Someone with backbone." The implication was clear, and Alina busied herself with smoothing the fabric of the dress to hide her reaction. "I'm just grateful for the work," she murmured. Martha made a noncommittal sound and continued with her pinning. "There. That should do it. We can start the alterations tomorrow evening." That night, Alina lay awake longer than usual, her thoughts circling around the growing feelings she could no longer deny. In just a month, Caleb Grayson had become more than her employer, more than her rescuer. His quiet strength, his unwavering sense of justice, the care he took with those dependent on him, all these qualities had worked their way into her heart. But could he, feel the same? He'd been nothing but proper in their interactions, kind but reserved. The moments of connection she thought she'd sensed might be merely wishful thinking on her part. With a sigh, Alina turned over, punching her pillow into a more comfortable shape. She was fortunate to have found a safe haven here. Wanting more felt dangerously like tempting fate. The following morning, Caleb announced at breakfast that he needed to ride into Silver Reef for supplies and to check on cattle prices at the stockyards. "I thought Miss Palmer might accompany me," he added, glancing at Alina. "If she'd like to." Alina looked up in surprise. "Me?" "You mentioned needing some personal items," he said, his expression carefully neutral. "And Martha has a list of household supplies we need." "I'd be happy to go," Alina replied, trying to conceal her pleasure at the prospect of spending the day with him. "When would we leave?" "Within the hour, if that suits. It's a fair ride, and I'd like to be back before dark." Alina hurried through her morning chores and changed into one of Lydia's dresses that required no alterations, a pretty blue calico that Martha assured her brought out the color of her eyes. She just finished pinning her hair into a neat bun when Martha appeared in her doorway. "You look lovely, dear," the older woman said approvingly. "Here, take this." She pressed a small drawstring purse into Alina's hand. "A little extra for anything special you might want in town." "Oh, I couldn't," Alina began. "It's not charity," Martha interrupted firmly. "It's your due. You've worked hard these past weeks, harder than any hired girl we've had before." Her expression softened. Humor an old woman who has no daughters of her own to fuss over. Touched, Alina impulsively hugged her. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." Martha patted her back, then pulled away with a brisk nod. "Off with you now, Caleb's waiting by the wagon." The journey to Silver Reef took nearly 2 hours, during which Alina found herself increasingly comfortable in Caleb's company. He pointed out landmarks along the way, told her stories of the area's history, and even shared a few memories from his childhood tales of fishing expeditions gone awry and youthful misadventures with the Miller brothers, who had grown up on a neighboring ranch. Silver Reef itself was busier than Alina remembered from her last visit, the ill-fated trip to the county fair. The former boomtown had quieted some since its silver mining heyday, but still served as an important trading center for the surrounding ranches and farms. "We'll start at Barton's Mercantile," Caleb said as he helped her down from the wagon. "They carry most of what we need." The Mercantile was cool and dim after the bright sunlight outside, its shelves stocked with everything from farming implements to bolts of fabric. While Caleb discussed feed prices with Mr. Barton, Alina wandered through the store, making selections from Martha's list, and adding a few small personal items: a cake of lavender soap, hairpins, and a small bottle of rose-scented toilet water. As she examined a display of ribbons, trying to decide if she could justify such a frivolous purchase, a familiar voice made her freeze. "Well, if it isn't little Alina Palmer." Alina turned slowly to face her stepmother. Gertrude looked much as she had at the fair, though perhaps a bit thinner, her once fine dress showing signs of wear. "Gertrude," Alina acknowledged, lifting her chin slightly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Nor I you," Gertrude replied, her gaze taking in Alina's neat appearance and new dress. "I see you've landed on your feet." Her tone made the observation sound like an accusation. "I've been fortunate," Alina said carefully. Gertrude's lips twisted in a bitter smile. "Yes, quite fortunate to catch the eye of Caleb Grayson. Half the unmarried women in the county have tried and failed to get his attention." "It's not like that," Alina protested, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I work for him." "Do you now?" Gertrude raised an eyebrow. "And does your work include accompanying him to town dressed in finery I certainly never provided you?" Before Alina could respond, Caleb appeared at her side. "Mrs. Palmer," he said coolly. "I trust you're well." Gertrude's expression faltered momentarily before she recovered her composure. "Mr. Grayson." "Yes, quite well, thank you." "Good," he replied, his tone making it clear the pleasantries were merely for form's sake. "If you'll excuse us, we have several more stops to make today." He placed a hand at the small of Alina's back, guiding her toward the counter where Mr. Barton was totaling their purchases. Alina could feel Gertrude's eyes boring into her back but resisted the urge to look over her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Caleb asked quietly as they waited for their items to be wrapped. "Yes," Alina replied, though her hands trembled slightly. "Just surprised to see her. We don't have to stay in town if you'd rather head back to the ranch." Alina shook her head firmly. "No, I won't let her spoil the day." She managed a smile. "Besides, you promised to show me the new schoolhouse you helped build." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "So I did." They completed their business at the Mercantile and continued with the rest of their errands. Caleb seemed to make a point of introducing Alina to everyone. They met the blacksmith, the sheriff, the banker, even the minister and his wife whom they encountered outside the post office. Each time, he presented her simply as Miss Alina Palmer, who's helping at the ranch. But his manner made it clear she was to be treated with respect. By the time they stopped for lunch at the small hotel restaurant, Alina had almost forgotten the unpleasant encounter with Gertrude. The dining room was nearly empty, it being past the usual lunch hour, and they were seated at a quiet table by the window. "Thank you," Alina said after they'd ordered. For before, with Gertrude, Caleb's expression hardened slightly. "That woman sold you like livestock." "She deserves a lot worse than a cold greeting." "Even so," Alina persisted, "you didn't have to be so protective." She hesitated, then added, "It means a great deal to me." His features softened. "You're part of the ranch now, and I look after my own." The simple declaration warmed her more than it probably should have. Before she could respond, Their food arrived hearty beef stew and fresh baked bread that reminded Alina how long it had been since breakfast. As they ate, Caleb surprised her by asking about her life before she came to the ranch. "Martha mentioned your father was a farmer," he prompted. Alina nodded. "He had a small homestead about 30 miles east of here. Nothing like your ranch, just 40 acres, mostly wheat and a few dairy cows. He was a good man, worked himself to exhaustion to provide for me after my mother died." She paused, remembering. "He loved books, used to read to me every night, no matter how tired he was." "He sounds like someone I would have respected," Caleb said quietly. "I think he would have liked you too," Alina replied, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. She quickly changed the subject. "What about your parents? Martha told me your mother was a teacher." A shadow crossed Caleb's face. "She was. Came out west with her family when she was young, taught in a one-room schoolhouse where my father was on the school board. They fell in love, married, had Lydia and me." His voice softened with memory. "She taught us both at home before we were old enough for formal schooling. Said education was the one thing no one could take from you." "When did she pass?" Alina asked gently. "I was 15, influenza." His jaw tightened. "Same year the war started. Pa was never the same after she died." Alina reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "I'm sorry." He looked surprised at the gesture but didn't pull away. "It was a long time ago." After lunch, they visited the new schoolhouse as promised. The simple yet sturdy building stood on the outskirts of town, its fresh white paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. "The community raised the money, but we all pitched in with the actual building," Caleb explained as they walked through the empty classroom. "Every ranch and farm in the area sent men to help. Took us less than a month working together." "It's wonderful," Alina said, running her fingers along a smooth desk. "How many children attend?" "About 20 when everyone's in town," Caleb replied. "More in winter when the outlying families can't work their land." He leaned against the teacher's desk, watching her. "Martha says you have a way with figures. Ever thought of teaching?" The question caught Alina off guard. "Me? No, I never completed my own schooling. After Mother died, I was needed at home." "You don't need formal certification to teach out here," Caleb said. "Just knowledge and patience." "The school board's been looking for an assistant teacher for the fall term." Alina stared at him. "Are you suggesting?" "Just something to consider," he said with a casual shrug that didn't quite mask his interest in her answer. "It would be 2 days a week, working alongside Mrs. Thornton, the head teacher. You could still help at the ranch the rest of the time." "I'll think about it," Alina promised, touched that he would consider her capable of such a position. By the time they left town, the wagon loaded with supplies, the sun was beginning its western descent. They traveled in companionable silence for a while, Alina reflecting on the day's events. Despite the encounter with Gertrude, it had been one of the most pleasant days she could remember. "You're quiet," Caleb observed after several miles. Alina smiled. "Just thinking about what you said." "About teaching. And I think I'd like to try," she admitted. "If Mrs. Thornton thinks I'm qualified." Caleb nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "I'll speak to her next time she's in town." He hesitated, then added, "You have a lot to offer, Alina. More than you give yourself credit for." The simple compliment meant more coming from him than flowery praise would have from anyone else. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me." His eyes met hers briefly, intense and unguarded in a way she'd rarely seen. "It's easy to believe in someone when you see their true worth." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Alina was afraid to interpret too hopefully. Before she could form a response, a distant rumble of hooves drew Caleb's attention. He pulled the wagon to a stop, standing to peer down the road behind them. "Riders coming fast," he muttered, his expression darkening as he made out the approaching figures. Donovan and his boys. Alina felt a flutter of apprehension. The encounter with the neighboring rancher at the property boundary had left her with an uneasy impression. What would they want with us? Nothing good, Caleb replied grimly, reaching beneath the seat and withdrawing a rifle that Alina hadn't known was there. He laid it across his lap, not pointing it, but making its presence clear. Stay calm. The three horsemen thundered up alongside the wagon, forcing Caleb to rein in the team to avoid a collision. Victor Donovan and his sons James and William circled around, effectively blocking the road ahead. Twice in 1 month, Grayson, the elder Donovan called. To what do we owe the pleasure? Just heading home, Donovan, Caleb replied evenly. Got business to attend to. Donovan smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. We heard you were in town. Showing your pretty little helper the sights. His gaze shifted to Alina. Miss Palmer, isn't it? I believe we've met briefly. Alina nodded stiffly. Mr. Donovan. Heard an interesting story about you in town today, Donovan continued, ignoring Caleb's increasingly tense posture. Something about a stepmother trying to sell you off at the county fair. That true? Alina felt the blood drain from her face. Gertrude must have been spreading tales. That's none of your business, Caleb cut in sharply. Maybe not, Donovan agreed with false amiability. But it makes me wonder what kind of operation you're running, Grayson. Buying women at fairs, setting them up in your house. He shook his head in mock concern. Folks might talk. The only folks talking are you and that woman, Caleb retorted, his knuckles white where he gripped the rifle. Now get out of our way. James Donovan, the eldest son, moved his horse closer to the wagon. Pa's right, Grayson. Doesn't look proper, you living out there with just the girl and old Martha. People are already wondering what kind of arrangement you've got. Alina felt sick at the insinuation. Mr. Grayson saved me from a terrible situation, she said, her voice shaking slightly with anger. He's been nothing but honorable. I'm sure, Donovan said in a tone that suggested the opposite. Still, a young, unmarried man and a pretty girl alone on that big ranch. Well, reputation is everything out here. Say what you came to say, Donovan, Caleb demanded, his patience clearly wearing thin. The older man's pretense at friendliness dropped away. All right, Grayson, I'll be direct. I want your water rights. The drought's getting worse, and my herd needs access to that creek that runs through your property. The offer I made is fair, more than fair. And I already told you, the ranch isn't for sale. Times are changing, Donovan persisted. Small operations like yours can't compete with the bigger outfits moving in. You're young, you could take that money and start fresh somewhere else. Maybe California. I hear there's good land opening up there. This is my family's land, Caleb said flatly, has been for 3 generations. I'm not selling. Donovan's expression hardened. You might want to reconsider. Things happen out here, accidents, mysterious fires, cattle that go missing or turn up dead. His gaze slid meaningfully to Alina. It'd be a shame if anything happened to your employee. Alina felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. The threat was unmistakable. That sounds an awful lot like a threat, Donovan, Caleb said, raising the rifle slightly. I'd be careful about making those in front of witnesses. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Victor Donovan laughed, though the sound held no humor. Just stating facts, Grayson. The territory's getting civilized, but it's still a dangerous place for those who don't understand how things work. He reined his horse around. Think about my offer. It won't stay open forever. With that, he and his sons rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Caleb watched them go, the rifle still ready in his hands. Are you all right? He asked Alina once the riders were well away. Yes, she replied, though her heart was still racing. Do you think they meant it about accidents? Caleb's jaw tightened as he stowed the rifle back under the seat. Donovan's got a reputation for playing rough but actual violence. I don't know. He glanced at her, concern evident in his eyes. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. It's not your fault, Alina assured him. But I understand now why you're so determined not to sell. It's not just about the land, Caleb explained as he set the wagon in motion again. It's about what's right. Donovan wants to control the entire valley, push out the smaller ranchers, dictate prices. If he gets my water rights, half the farms downstream will suffer. He shook his head grimly. Men like that only understand one thing: strength. They traveled in silence for several miles, both lost in thought. The encounter had cast a pall over what had been an otherwise pleasant day, and Alina found herself worrying about what Donovan might do next. We should probably warn Martha, she said as they approached the ranch. About Donovan's threats, Caleb nodded. I'll speak to the hands too. Everyone should be on alert for anything unusual, he glanced at her. I want you to be careful too. Don't go riding alone for a while, especially near the boundaries. I won't, she promised. As they pulled up to the ranch house, Martha emerged from the kitchen door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her welcoming smile faltered as she noted their serious expressions. What happened? She asked, immediately sensing something was wrong. Donovan, Caleb replied grimly as he helped Alina down from the wagon, made some threats on the road. Martha's eyes widened in alarm. What kind of threats? The usual accidents, fires, missing cattle. Caleb's jaw tightened, but this time he implied Alina might be in danger too. The devil take that man, Martha exclaimed, ushering them inside. Come in, both of you. Dinner's ready and you can tell me everything. Over Martha's hearty beef and potato stew, they recounted both the encounter with Gertrude and the confrontation with the Donovans. Martha listened with growing concern, her usual calm demeanor giving way to visible worry. I've never trusted Victor Donovan, she declared when they'd finished. Not since he tried to cheat your father out of that north pasture land, but threatening a young woman, that's a new low, even for him. Do you think he's serious? Alina asked. Or just trying to frighten us? Martha and Caleb exchanged a look that did nothing to ease Alina's concern. Donovan wants what he wants, Martha said carefully, and he's not used to being denied. We'll be vigilant, Caleb added. I'll have the hands take shifts keeping watch at night, at least for a while. Despite their reassurances, Alina went to bed that night with a sense of unease. The cozy security she'd begun to feel at the ranch now seemed threatened from multiple directions. Gertrude's malicious gossip, Donovan's barely veiled threats, the implication that her presence was somehow improper, all combined to make her question her place here. She tossed and turned for hours before finally falling into a fitful sleep, only to be awakened before dawn by the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. Leaping from bed, Alina hastily pulled on a wrapper over her nightgown and rushed to the window. In the pre-dawn light, she could make out flames licking at the roof of the barn, illuminating the figures of men running toward the blaze with buckets. Without stopping to dress properly, she grabbed her shawl and raced downstairs, nearly colliding with Martha in the hallway. The barn's on fire, Martha exclaimed unnecessarily. Quick, help me with these buckets. They joined the bucket brigade that had already formed between the well and the burning barn. Caleb, stripped to his shirt and trousers, directed the men as they fought to contain the blaze. Alina took her place in the line, passing heavy buckets despite the strain on her arms. The horses. She called to Frank Miller as he dashed past with an empty bucket. All out, he shouted back. Caleb and Tom got them into the corral. For nearly an hour they battled the fire. By the time the sun rose, they had managed to save most of the barn, though one corner was badly damaged, and the hay stored inside was a complete loss. Exhausted, smoke-stained, and soaked with water and sweat, Alina sank down onto a log near the chicken coop. Martha joined her, looking equally spent. "You think it was Donovan?" Alina asked quietly. Martha's expression was grim. "Who else? The timing's too convenient to be an accident." Caleb approached them, his face streaked with soot, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. He crouched down in front of Alina, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked. "You shouldn't have been out here. It was dangerous." "I couldn't just stay inside," Alina protested. "Not when everyone was fighting the fire." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, I suppose you couldn't." He glanced toward the smoldering barn. "We were lucky. Could have been much worse if Doc hadn't been on watch and spotted it early." "It was Donovan, wasn't it?" Alina asked. Caleb's expression hardened. "Can't prove it, but yes, I'd stake my life on it." He rose, his weariness evident in every movement. "I need to check the damage, see what we can salvage. Martha, maybe you could get some breakfast started for the men. They've earned it." "Of course," Martha agreed, standing with a groan. "Come along, Alina. Let's get cleaned up and put some food on the table." As they walked back to the house, Alina couldn't help looking back at Caleb, who stood surveying the damaged barn with a set to his shoulders that spoke of determination rather than defeat. Whatever Donovan had hoped to accomplish with this attack, it seemed to have only strengthened Caleb's resolve. The day that followed was one of intense activity as everyone worked to clear debris and begin repairs to the barn. Alina and Martha prepared massive quantities of food to keep the workers fed, then joined the cleanup efforts themselves. By nightfall, temporary repairs had secured the structure against the elements, though proper rebuilding would take days. After the evening meal, Caleb called everyone together in the main room of the house, the three ranch hands, Martha and Alina. "First, I want to thank you all for your efforts today," he began. "Without your quick action, we could have lost the entire barn and possibly more." Murmurs of acknowledgement met his words. "I think we all know this wasn't an accident," Caleb continued, his expression grave. "Donovan's getting desperate, and that makes him dangerous." He outlined a plan for increased vigilance, rotating watches through the night, regular patrols of the property boundaries, checking the water sources daily for signs of tampering. "What about the sheriff?" Doc suggested. "Seems like attempted arson is something he ought to know about." Caleb shook his head. "Without proof, it's just our word against Donovan's, and Sheriff Buchanan owes his position to the support of men like Donovan." He sighed. "No, for now we watch and wait, document everything. If Donovan tries again, maybe we'll catch him red-handed." "And if he comes after Miss Alina like he threatened?" Tom Miller asked, his young face serious. Alina felt a chill at the direct acknowledgement of the threat against her. Caleb's gaze met hers across the room, his expression softening momentarily before hardening with determination. "She won't be alone," he stated firmly. "Not off the ranch, not even here. We take shifts, make sure someone's always nearby." "I can't ask you all to rearrange your lives to protect me," Alina protested. "You're not asking," Frank Miller replied before Caleb could speak. "We're offering. You're part of the ranch now, Miss Alina." The simple declaration, echoing Caleb's words from their trip to town, brought unexpected tears to Alina's eyes. In the short time she'd been at the ranch, these people had become more of a family to her than Gertrude had ever been. "Thank you," she managed. "All of you." After the meeting broke up, Alina found herself alone with Caleb in the study. He stood by the window, staring out into the darkness, his profile etched in lamplight. "You should know," he he said without turning, "that Martha told me what Gertrude implied in town about us." Alina felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Oh, if your reputation is suffering because of your position here." He hesitated. "I would understand if you wanted to seek employment elsewhere. Perhaps in town where there would be no misunderstandings." "Is that what you want?" Alina asked, her heart suddenly pounding. "For me to leave?" Now he did turn, his blue eyes intense in the low light. "No, that's the last thing I want." The admission hung between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Alina took a step toward him. "Then I'll stay," she said simply. "I don't care what Gertrude or anyone else says." "It's not just gossip," Caleb warned. "Donovan will use it against us both if he can. He's already trying." "Let him try," Alina replied with more bravado than she felt. "I'm not afraid of him." Caleb's expression softened into something like admiration. "You're stronger than you know, Alina Palmer." The way he said her name with a warmth that seemed to caress each syllable made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might close the distance between them, might take her hand, or even her heart raced at the thought, kiss her. But instead he stepped back, maintaining the proper distance between employer and employee. "It's late," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." "Of course," Alina replied, hiding her disappointment behind a polite smile. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Alina." As August gave way to September, the threatened follow-up to the barn fire never materialized. Whether deterred by their increased vigilance or simply biding his time, Victor Donovan made no further overt moves against the ranch. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm, though everyone remained watchful. Alina began her work as assistant teacher at the Silver Reef School, riding in with Caleb or one of the hands twice a week. To her surprise, she found she had a genuine talent for teaching, particularly with the younger children who responded to her patience and gentle encouragement. Mrs. Thornton, a stern but fair woman in her 50s, became a mentor of sorts, guiding Alina through the challenges of managing a classroom of children ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. "You have a natural gift," Mrs. Thornton remarked after a particularly successful geography lesson. "Have you considered pursuing formal teacher training?" Alina shook her head. "I never thought it was a possibility. After my mother died, schooling became secondary to helping my father." "It's not too late," the older teacher encouraged. "There's a normal school in Salt Lake City. With my recommendation, you could attend next summer session." The suggestion was both exciting and troubling. The prospect of proper training appealed to Alina's love of learning, but the idea of leaving the ranch, leaving Caleb, even temporarily, filled her with an inexplicable dread. "I'll consider it," she promised noncommittally. That evening, riding home with Frank Miller as her escort, Alina found herself wondering what Caleb would think of Mrs. Thornton's suggestion. Would he encourage her to pursue the opportunity? Or would he, like her, see it as a separation neither of them wanted? The truth she had been avoiding for weeks, perhaps months, could no longer be denied. She had fallen in love with Caleb Grayson. Each day spent in his company only deepened her feelings, his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of justice, the gentle way he handled newborn calves, the respect he showed to everyone from Martha to the youngest ranch hand. She loved the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the thoughtful furrow of his brow when he was solving a problem, even the stubborn set of his jaw when he faced a challenge. But did he feel the same? There were moments when she thought perhaps he did a lingering glance, a gentle touch when helping her onto her horse, the way his eyes sought hers across a crowded room. Yet he maintained a careful distance, never crossing the invisible boundary between employer and employee. Alina was so lost in these thoughts that she barely noticed when Frank suddenly reined in his horse, one hand moving to the rifle in his saddle holster. "Miss Alina," he said quietly, "I think we're being followed." Startled from her reverie, Alina glanced behind them. In the gathering dusk, she could just make out the silhouettes of horsemen on the ridge they had passed minutes before. "Donovan," she whispered. "Can't tell," Frank replied grimly. "But we're not waiting to find out. Can you ride hard?" Alina nodded, gathering Willow's reins more firmly. "Yes." "Then let's go. Stay close." They urged their horses into a gallop, taking a less direct route back to the ranch that would keep them in the open rather than passing through the narrow canyon that was the usual shortcut. Alina's heart pounded with fear and exhilaration as Willow stretched into a full run, her hooves thundering against the hard, packed earth. A glance over her shoulder confirmed her worst fears. Their pursuers had abandoned any pretense of subtlety and were now giving chase, 3 riders pushing their mounts hard. "Almost there," Frank shouted. "Don't look back." The ranch buildings came into view just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the valley in deepening shadows. Frank fired his rifle into the air, a warning signal to those at the ranch that trouble was approaching. The shot had the desired effect. As they galloped into the yard, Caleb, Tom, and Doc emerged from various buildings, weapons ready. Their pursuers, seeing they were outnumbered, wheeled their horses around and disappeared back into the gathering darkness. Alina slid from Willow's back, her legs shaky from the hard ride and the fading rush of fear. Before she could steady herself, Caleb was at her side, one strong arm around her waist. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No," she assured him, "just rattled. They followed us from the canyon turn. 3 riders," Frank confirmed, dismounting more sedately. "Couldn't make out their faces, but one was riding a paint horse like James Donovan Favors." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That tears it. They've gone too far." He turned to Tom. "Ride for the sheriff. I don't care if he's in Donovan's pocket. Attempted kidnapping is something even he can't ignore." "Kidnapping," Alina echoed, shocked. "You think that's what they intended? Why else chase you?" Caleb's arm tightened briefly around her waist before he seemed to remember himself and stepped back. "Donovan knows you're important to the ranch. Taking you would be a way to force my hand." The slip wasn't lost on Alina, despite her distress. Important to him, not just to the ranch. The knowledge gave her a strange, fierce joy even in the midst of danger. "I'll go for the sheriff," Tom agreed, already heading for the stables to fetch a fresh horse. "The rest of us double the watch tonight," Caleb ordered. "I don't think they'll try again so soon, but I'm not taking chances." His gaze returned to Alina, softening slightly. "Let's get you inside. You're shaking." Martha was waiting anxiously in the kitchen, having heard the warning shot. She took one look at Alina's pale face and immediately set about making tea, muttering dire threats about what she'd like to do to those Donovan hooligans. "I'll be fine," Alina insisted, though she accepted the steaming cup gratefully. "They didn't catch us." "No thanks to them not trying," Frank muttered. "If we'd taken the canyon route like usual." The implication hung in the air, making Alina shiver despite the warm tea. If they'd been caught in the narrow confines of the canyon, there would have been nowhere to run. "How did they know we'd be on that road today?" Martha wondered aloud. "My teaching schedule isn't exactly secret," Alina pointed out. "Anyone in town would know I come back to the ranch on Tuesdays and Thursdays." "Which means they planned this," Caleb concluded grimly. "They waited until they knew I wouldn't be with you." Alina's hands tightened around her cup. "What do we do now?" "We wait for the sheriff," Caleb replied, though his tone suggested he held little hope that official intervention would solve their problems. And we stay vigilant. Sheriff Buchanan arrived the next morning, a portly man with a drooping mustache and the harried expression of someone who would rather be anywhere else. He listened to their account with visible skepticism. "You say it was the Donovans, but you didn't actually see their faces." He clarified, making notes in a small book. "It was nearly dark," Frank admitted. "But one was riding a paint horse, lot of paint horses in the territory," the sheriff interrupted. "Could have been anyone." "3 riders just happened to chase Miss Palmer and my ranch hand the same day Victor Donovan threatened her," Caleb challenged. "That's quite a coincidence, Sheriff," Buchanan sighed. "Look, Grayson, I understand you're upset. But without witnesses or proof, I can't just ride over to the Double D and start making accusations against one of the most powerful men in the county." "So you'll do nothing," Caleb concluded flatly. "I didn't say that," the sheriff protested. "I'll ask around, see if anyone noticed anything suspicious. Maybe someone in town saw the Donovan boys heading this way yesterday afternoon." He closed his notebook. "In the meantime, I suggest you all stay vigilant and avoid traveling alone." After the sheriff departed, his reluctance to take decisive action obvious to everyone, Caleb paced the length of the kitchen like a caged predator. "He won't do anything," he muttered. "Donovan practically owns him." "Then we handle this ourselves," Martha declared firmly. "Eleanor doesn't leave the ranch without you or at least 2 of the hands as escort. No more teaching until this is resolved." "I can't just abandon my students," Eleanor protested. "You won't be abandoning them if you're kidnapped," Martha retorted. "Or worse." "Martha's right," Caleb said, his expression leaving no room for argument. "It's too dangerous. Mrs. Thornton will understand once I explain the situation." Eleanor wanted to object further but recognized the genuine concern behind their insistence. "Very well, but only temporarily. I won't let Donovan disrupt my life indefinitely." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "Just until we find a way to deal with him permanently." The days that followed were tense, the atmosphere at the ranch charged with watchful anticipation. Caleb rode to town to speak with Mrs. Thornton, returning with her understanding wishes for Eleanor's safety and a packet of lessons and assignments to review in her absence. As September progressed, there were no further incidents, though reports from town suggested the Donovans were boasting of imminent changes to the valley's ranching operations. Victor Donovan had apparently secured financial backing from Eastern investors for a significant expansion, contingent upon controlling the water rights currently held by the Grayson Ranch. "He's getting desperate," Doc commented one evening as they discussed the latest rumors over dinner. "Those investors won't wait forever. If he can't deliver the water rights, they'll take their money elsewhere." "Which makes him even more dangerous," Caleb concluded grimly. That night, Eleanor found it difficult to sleep. The full harvest moon cast silver light through her window, illuminating her room almost as brightly as day. After tossing and turning for hours, she rose, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and moved to the window seat to gaze out at the moonlit ranch. The valley spread before her, peaceful under the silvery glow pastures where cattle dozed, fields of harvested wheat stubble, the shadowy outline of the distant hills. Hard to believe that such tranquility could exist alongside the threats that had disrupted their lives. Movement near the barn caught her attention. A figure emerged from the shadows. Caleb, she realized, making his rounds before turning in for the night. Even from a distance, she recognized his purposeful stride, the set of his shoulders. He paused by the corral, gazing out toward the hills as she was doing, seemingly lost in thought. An impulse seized her, powerful and undeniable. Before she could reconsider, Eleanor was pulling on her boots and making her way quietly down the stairs and out the kitchen door. The night air was cool against her face, carrying the scents of dust and pine and the lingering sweetness of autumn flowers. She moved quietly across the yard, her shawl drawn tight around her nightdress. Caleb didn't notice her approach until she was nearly upon him, a testament to how deeply absorbed he was in his thoughts. "Eleanor," he said, turning with surprise. "What are you doing out here? It's late." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, moving to stand beside him at the corral fence. "I saw you from my window." He glanced up at the house, then back at her, concern evident in his expression. "You shouldn't be out here alone, even within the yard." "I'm not alone," she pointed out softly. "I'm with you." Something flickered in his eyes, gone too quickly for her to interpret. They stood in silence for a moment, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. "What were you thinking about?" she asked finally. "You looked troubled," Caleb sighed, his breath forming a small cloud in the cooling air. "Donovan, the ranch, you." He glanced at her, then quickly away. "Everything." "Me," she prompted, her heart beginning to race. His hands tightened on the corral fence. "I've been thinking that maybe you'd be safer somewhere else, until this situation with Donovan is resolved." Cold fear washed through her. "You want me to leave?" "No," he said quickly, turning to face her fully. In the moonlight, his features were cast in silver and shadow, his eyes dark and unreadable. "God knows that's the last thing I want. But I keep thinking about what might have happened if Frank hadn't been with you that day, if you'd been riding alone." "But I wasn't," she reminded him, "and I'm fine." "This time," he said grimly. "Donovan won't stop, Eleanor, not until he gets what he wants." "And what do you want, Caleb?" The question escaped before she could consider its wisdom, hanging in the night air between them. For a long moment he didn't answer, his gaze searching her face as if looking for something he feared to find. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "I want you safe. I want you happy." He paused, then added so quietly she almost didn't hear, "I want you with me." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "Then I'll stay," she whispered, "because that's what I want too." Something broke in his expression then, a wall crumbling after standing too long against a rising tide. With a movement so swift she barely registered it, Caleb closed the distance between them, one hand coming up to cradle her face with exquisite gentleness. "Eleanor," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. Then he was kissing her, his mouth warm and certain against hers, and Eleanor was kissing him back, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, then his neck, then tangling in his hair. The world narrowed to this single point of contact, this perfect union of lips and breath and heartbeat. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cupping her cheek. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he confessed. "From the moment you stood up to your stepmother at the fair, I think. Definitely since I saw you helping Martha with the laundry your first week here, laughing in the sunshine like you belonged." "I did belong," she replied softly. "I do belong. Here with you." He kissed her again, more gently this time, a seal on an unspoken promise. Then, with obvious reluctance, he stepped back, though he kept hold of her hand. "We should go inside," he said. "It's getting cold and you're not dressed for night air." Eleanor suddenly became acutely aware of her state of undressed nightgown and shawl, hair loose down her back. Heat flooded her cheeks. Martha would be scandalized. Caleb's lips twitched in a suppressed smile. "Martha has been practically pushing us together for months. I think she'd be relieved we finally came to our senses." He walked her back to the house, up the porch steps and to the kitchen door. There he kissed her once more, lingering and sweet, before reluctantly releasing her. "Good night, Eleanor," he murmured. "Sleep well." "Good night, Caleb," she replied, a smile she couldn't have suppressed if she tried, spreading across her face. This time, when Eleanor returned to her bed, sleep came easily. carrying her into dreams filled with moonlight and the memory of Caleb's lips on hers. The following morning, Alina entered the kitchen to find Martha already at work kneading dough for the day's bread. The older woman took one look at her face and smiled knowingly. "Well," she said, dusting flour from her hands, "it's about time." Alina felt her cheeks warm. "What do you mean?" Martha's eyes twinkled. "I wasn't born yesterday, child. Something's different about you this morning. And I'd wager it has something to do with the fact that Caleb was whistling when he came in for coffee at dawn, something I haven't heard him do since before his father passed." There seemed little point in denying it. "We talked last night," Alina admitted. "In the yard, talked," Martha repeated skeptically. "I see." Before Alina could elaborate, the back door opened and Caleb himself entered, bringing with him the crisp scent of autumn air. His eyes found Alina immediately, and the smile that lit his face made her heart flip in her chest. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm with private meaning. "Good morning," she replied, aware of Martha's amused observation but unable to look away from Caleb. "Well," Martha said briskly, breaking the moment, "since you're both here, I should tell you I'm riding into town with Frank this morning. Need to pick up some things from the mercantile, and I promised Mrs. Thornton I'd deliver Alina's graded assignments." Alina suspected this errand was at least partially fabricated to give her and Caleb time alone, but she merely nodded. "Please give Mrs. Thornton my regards." After breakfast, Martha departed with Frank, leaving Alina and Caleb alone in the house. For a moment they stood in the kitchen, suddenly awkward in the bright light of day after the emotional revelations of the previous night. "I meant what I said," Caleb said finally, breaking the silence. "Last night, all of it." Alina's heart swelled with joy and relief. "So did I." He closed the distance between them then, drawing her into his arms with a certainty that hadn't been there before. His kiss was different too, less hesitant, more possessive, a clear declaration of intent. Alina responded in kind, her hands sliding up his chest to link behind his neck. When they parted, Caleb kept his arms around her waist, unwilling to let her go completely. "There's something I need to ask you," he said, his expression growing serious. "Yes," Alina prompted when he hesitated. "I know this is sudden," he began, "or maybe it isn't. Maybe it's been building since the day I saw you at that fair." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Alina. I think I've loved you from the beginning, though I was too stubborn or too blind to admit it." Alina's eyes filled with tears of joy. "I love you too, Caleb, more than I thought possible." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then marry me. Be my wife, my partner in everything. Help me build something here that will last generations." The proposal, so straightforward and so perfectly Caleb, filled Alina's heart to bursting. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." His whoop of joy echoed through the kitchen as he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down and kissing her thoroughly. When they broke apart, both laughing and breathless, his expression was more carefree than she had ever seen it. "We should wait for spring," Alina suggested practically, though she would have married him that very day if possible. "After the winter, when travel is easier. My students will be finishing their term and the ranch will be less demanding." "Spring it is," Caleb agreed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with tender familiarity. "Though it seems a long way off. We have plenty to do in the meantime," she reminded him, "including resolving our problem with the Donovans." At the mention of their antagonists, Caleb's expression sobered. "Yes, that needs to be settled before we can truly move forward." As if summoned by their discussion, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Caleb moved to the window, his body tensing as he peered out. "Riders coming," he said, his voice tight. "Several of them." Alina joined him at the window, her heart sinking as she recognized Victor Donovan at the head of a group of 6 men, including his sons. "What do they want?" "Nothing good," Caleb replied grimly. He turned to her, his eyes intense. "Stay inside. No matter what happens, stay in the house where it's safe." "Caleb," she began to protest. "Please, Alina." His hand caught hers, squeezing tightly. "I need to know you're safe while I deal with this." Reluctantly, she nodded. "Be careful." He kissed her quickly, fiercely, then moved to the gun cabinet in the corner of the kitchen, removing his rifle and checking that it was loaded. With one last glance at Alina, he stepped out onto the porch to meet the approaching riders. From the window, Alina watched as Caleb stood his ground, rifle held casually but ready at his side. The Donovans and their men reined in their horses in the yard, the tension palpable even from a distance. "Grayson," Victor Donovan called, his voice carrying clearly through the morning air. "Time we had a final discussion about this property." "Nothing to discuss, Donovan," Caleb replied evenly. "The ranch isn't for sale, never will be." Donovan's expression darkened. "I tried to be reasonable, offered you a fair price, but my patience is at an end." "As is mine," Caleb retorted. "Your sons chased my employee on a public road. You threatened her safety. You tried to burn my barn." He raised the rifle slightly. "You're trespassing now. I suggest you leave." "Or what?" James Donovan sneered. "You'll shoot all of us. You're outnumbered, Grayson." "Maybe," Caleb acknowledged. "But I guarantee I'll take some of you with me if it comes to that." The standoff stretched, taut as a wire about to snap. Alina's heart hammered in her chest as she watched, terrified that at any moment violence would erupt. Caleb stood alone against 6 armed men, yet his posture showed no hint of backing down. Just as it seemed the situation could not grow more tense, the sound of more approaching riders broke the tableau. From the direction of town came a group of horsemen, Sheriff Buchanan in the lead, followed by Frank Miller and, to Alina's surprise, several townsmen she recognized, including the blacksmith, the banker, and Reverend Hayes from the church. "What's going on here?" the sheriff demanded as they rode into the yard. "Just a private business discussion, Sheriff," Donovan replied smoothly. "Nothing that concerns the law." 6 armed men confronting one looks like more than business to me, the sheriff observed, his usual obsequiousness toward Donovan notably absent. "Especially after the complaint I received this morning." Donovan's eyes narrowed. "Complaint?" "Signed affidavit from Frank Miller here, witnessed by Martha Jensen, detailing how he and Miss Palmer were chased on the public road by riders he identified as your sons." The sheriff's tone hardened. "And that's not all. Got another statement from a cowhand who worked for you until last week. Claims he overheard you ordering your foreman to teach Grayson a lesson the night before his barn mysteriously caught fire." Alina watched as the color drained from Donovan's face. "That's hearsay and lies," he blustered. "No proof." "Maybe," the sheriff conceded, "but it's enough to warrant an investigation. And I've got some interesting telegrams from Denver, too. Seems your Eastern investors might be reconsidering their partnership, given certain irregularities in your business practices that have come to light." Alina glanced at Frank, who stood beside his horse with a satisfied expression that suggested he knew more about these developments than he was letting on. Martha must have been busy indeed during her supposed shopping trip to town. Victor Donovan's composure cracked. "This is outrageous." "A conspiracy to ruin my reputation." "No, Donovan," Caleb interjected firmly. "This is justice, long overdue." "I suggest you and your men return to your ranch," Sheriff Buchanan continued, "and stay there while I conduct my investigation. Any further harassment of the Grayson property or its occupants will result in immediate arrests." For a moment, it seemed Donovan might resist. Then, with a muttered curse, he wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over, Grayson," he spat. "Yes, it is," Caleb replied with quiet certainty. "You just don't know it yet." The Donovans rode off, trailing dust and defeat. As they disappeared down the road, the tension in the yard dissipated like morning fog under the rising sun. Alina couldn't wait any longer. She burst from the house, running to Caleb's side. He turned at her approach, his face lighting with relief as he pulled her into a one-armed embrace, the rifle still held carefully in his other hand. "Are you all right?" she asked, scanning his face anxiously. "Never better," he assured her, his eyes warm with love and the satisfaction of victory. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Well, Miss Palmer, seems like you've had an eventful few weeks." "More than I expected when I arrived in Silver Reef," she agreed, conscious of the curious glances from the townsmen who had accompanied the sheriff. "Thank you for coming, Sheriff, all of you." "Thank Martha and Frank," the sheriff replied. "They're the ones who rounded up these fine citizens to serve as witnesses in case Donovan tried anything foolish." He shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "And I owe you an apology, Grayson. Should have taken your concerns more seriously from the start." Caleb nodded, accepting the apology without comment. The banker, Mr. Harrison, urged his horse forward. "Donovan's finished in this county," he announced. "I've been in contact with his investors. They're withdrawing their support and his loans are being called in." He glanced at Caleb. "You might be interested to know that they're looking for new local partners, someone with integrity and knowledge of the territory." Caleb's eyebrows rose. "Is that so?" "Something to consider," Harrison replied with a meaningful nod. "For the future." After the sheriff and townsmen departed, with promises to keep them informed about the investigation into Donovan's activities, Alina turned to Frank with newfound appreciation. So this was Martha's shopping trip. Gathering witnesses and evidence, Frank grinned. "Martha's been collecting information on Donovan for weeks. She knew Sheriff Buchanan wouldn't act without solid proof and community support." He shrugged modestly. "I just helped round up the posse." "And I'm grateful to you both," Caleb said, clapping Frank on the shoulder. "Where is Martha?" "Still in town, spreading the good word about the Donovan's downfall," Frank replied with a chuckle. "She'll be back for supper with enough gossip to last the winter." When they were finally alone again, Caleb pulled Alina into his arms properly, the rifle set safely aside. "I thought I told you to stay in the house," he chided gently. "I did," she defended herself. "Until it was safe." His expression grew serious. "It may not be completely over. Donovan could still cause trouble." "But not from a position of power," Alina pointed out. "Not anymore." Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "True, and with the backing of the town." He smiled suddenly, a full, unreserved expression of joy that transformed his face. "We can start planning our future without looking over our shoulders." "Our future," Alina repeated, savoring the words. "It has a nice sound, doesn't it?" "The best," he agreed, and sealed the sentiment with a kiss that promised all the tomorrows they would share. The weeks that followed brought dramatic changes to Silver Reef and the surrounding territory. Victor Donovan, faced with mounting legal troubles and financial ruin, sold his ranch at a fraction of its worth and departed for California, his sons in tow. The Eastern investors, impressed by Caleb's reputation and the quality of the Grayson Ranch operations, offered him a partnership that would allow him to expand without sacrificing his independence or principles. Alina returned to her teaching position, now with the added respect that came from her engagement to one of the area's most prominent ranchers. Mrs. Thornton was delighted by the news, both of the engagement and of Alina's decision to pursue formal teacher training the following summer. Caleb insisted, Alina explained during an afternoon planning session. Said he won't have his wife shortchanging her dreams just because she's married to a rancher. A wise man, Mrs. Thornton approved. You've chosen well, my dear. As winter settled over the valley, bringing snow to the higher pastures and quiet evenings by the fire, the ranch took on a sense of peaceful anticipation. Martha busied herself with preparations for the spring wedding, enlisting Alina's help in planning the celebration that would bring together friends and neighbors from throughout the county. Nothing too elaborate, Alina insisted as they pored over dress patterns one evening. Just family and close friends. Nonsense, Martha replied firmly. This is the social event of the season. Everyone will want to attend the wedding of Caleb Grayson and the brave young woman who stood up to the Donovans. Alina laughed. I hardly think that's how people see me. You'd be surprised, Caleb commented from the doorway, where he'd been listening unnoticed. He crossed the room to drop a kiss on Alina's head. The story of how we met has grown considerably in the telling. According to Doc, who was in town today, you single-handedly faced down your wicked stepmother while I merely provided the getaway horse. Well, that's clearly nonsense, Alina replied, smiling up at him. If I recall, you were quite heroic. And romantic, Martha added with a wink. Even if it took you months to admit it. Caleb had the grace to look sheepish. I was cautious, wanted to be sure of my feelings. And now, Alina prompted, her heart still thrilling at his openly affectionate gaze. Now I'm only sure that I can't wait until spring to make you my wife, he replied, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. 3 more months, she reminded him. It will pass quickly enough. And indeed it did. Winter gave way to the first tentative signs of spring snowdrops pushing through the melting drifts, the return of birds from their southern migrations, creeks swollen with snowmelt rushing toward the distant Colorado River. By April, the ranch was transformed in preparation for the wedding. The barn, fully repaired and expanded over the winter months, was decorated with evergreen boughs and early spring flowers. Tables were arranged in the yard, covered with white cloths Martha had been saving for a special occasion. Ranch hands and neighbors alike pitched in to ensure everything was perfect for the day. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and mild, as if nature herself had decided to bless the union. In the room that would soon no longer be just hers, Alina stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. The wedding dress, sewn by Martha from ivory silk, ordered specially from Salt Lake City, transformed her from the frightened young woman who had arrived at the ranch the previous summer into a radiant bride. A soft knock at the door announced Martha's arrival. The older woman's eyes filled with tears as she took in the sight before her. "Oh, my dear," she breathed. "You look absolutely beautiful." "Thanks to you," Alina replied, embracing her. "For everything, Martha. I wouldn't be here if not for you." Martha sniffed, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Nonsense. You and Caleb were meant to find each other. I just helped speed things along a bit." A commotion from downstairs interrupted their moment the arrival of guests, the sounds of greetings and laughter floating up through the open window. The ceremony would be held in the orchard, where the apple trees were just beginning to blossom, their delicate white petals like nature's own wedding decorations. "It's time," Martha said, adjusting Alina's veil one last time. "Are you ready?" Alina took a deep breath, her heart full to bursting with joy and anticipation. More than ready. The walk from the house to the orchard passed in a blur of smiling faces and murmured greetings. At the entrance to the rows of apple trees, Frank Miller waited to escort her, having volunteered for the honor in the absence of her father. "You look mighty fine, Miss Alina," he said, offering his arm. "Caleb's a lucky man." "Thank you, Frank," she replied, touched by the genuine affection in his eyes. "For everything." As they proceeded down the aisle formed by rows of chairs, Aliner's gaze fixed on the figure waiting beneath an arch of early roses and greenery. Caleb, more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean shaven for the occasion. But it was his expression that took her breath away, a look of such pure love and wonder that tears pricked at her eyes. When Frank placed her hand in Caleb's, the connection was like coming home after a long journey. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, as they turned to face Reverend Hayes. The ceremony itself was traditional and simple, their vows exchanged with clear voices that carried to every corner of the orchard. When Caleb slipped the gold band onto her finger, a band that had once belonged to his mother, Aliner felt the final piece of her heart lock into place. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Hayes declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Caleb's kiss was tender yet possessive, a promise of all that awaited them. As they turned to face their guests, now officially Mr. and Mrs. Caleb Grayson, the applause that erupted seemed to Aliner like the perfect accompaniment to the joy singing in her blood. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with food and dancing and more genuine goodwill than Aliner had experienced in years. Mrs. Thornton presented them with books for their library. The Miller brothers had carved a beautiful cradle for future use. And even Sheriff Buchanan made an appearance, bringing news that Victor Donovan's remaining legal troubles would keep him far from Utah territory for the foreseeable future. As twilight descended, Caleb found Aliner sitting with Martha, watching the dancers with contented exhaustion. "May I steal my wife for one last dance?" he asked, extending his hand to Aliner. "You may indeed," Martha replied with a satisfied smile. "She's yours now, after all." "And I am hers," Caleb responded, his eyes never leaving Aliner's face. He led her to the center of the improvised dance floor, where lanterns hung from tree branches cast a golden glow over the festivities. As they moved together to the music, Aliner laid her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Completely," she replied. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." He drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "When I rode to that county fair, I never imagined I'd find the love of my life being auctioned off by her stepmother." Aliner laughed softly. "When my stepmother dragged me to that fair, I never imagined I'd find the man I was meant to spend my life with." "Fate works in mysterious ways," Caleb observed, spinning her gently as the music swelled. "Or Martha does," Aliner teased, "since she sent you there." His laughter joined hers, the sound of their shared joy rising into the star-filled sky above the orchard, where their new life together had officially begun. Later that night, as Aliner lay in Caleb's arms in what was now their bedroom, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperation of that day at the county fair to the perfect contentment of being Caleb's wife, it seemed almost too miraculous to be real. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "How easily things might have been different," she replied honestly, "if you hadn't come to the fair that day, if you hadn't spoken up." He pulled her closer. "But I did, and you're here where you belong." "Where I belong," she repeated, savoring the certainty of those words. "With you." Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the Grayson Ranch yard as Aliner emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. From her vantage point on the porch, she could see 3-year-old James chasing after his father, who was deliberately slowing his stride to allow the boy to catch up. In the shade of the big oak tree, Martha sat with baby Sarah on her lap, the infant's dark curls so like Caleb's catching the afternoon sunlight. "Mama," James called, spotting her. "Papa's showing me the new foal. Is he now?" Alina replied with a smile. "And is it as beautiful as he promised?" "More beautiful," Caleb answered, swinging their son up onto his shoulders. "A perfect Palomino filly. She'll be James's first training project when she's ready." "Not for quite some time," Alina reminded him, though she knew Caleb would ensure their son's safety above all else. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations in the 5 years since their wedding. The partnership with the Eastern investors had allowed them to expand their operation, introduce better breeding stock, and implement new farming techniques that increased their yields substantially. The Grayson Ranch was now recognized as one of the most successful in the territory, a model that other ranchers sought to emulate. Alina had completed her teacher training and now divided her time between her family and the Silver Reef School, where she taught 3 days a week. The arrangement allowed her to pursue her passion for education, while still being present for the moments that mattered most in her children's lives. Martha, now moving more slowly but still the heart of the household, had taken on more of a grandmotherly role with the children while training a younger woman, Alice, to manage the daily household tasks. She declared regularly that seeing the ranch filled with children and happiness was all the reward she needed for her years of service. As Alina watched her family, the family she and Caleb had built together, her heart swelled with gratitude. The road that had brought them here had not always been smooth, but every challenge, every obstacle overcome had only strengthened the bond between them. Caleb approached, James still perched on his shoulders, the boy's small hands tangled in his father's hair. "What's that smile for?" Caleb asked, his eyes warm with the love that had only deepened over the years. "Just counting my blessings," Alina replied, reaching up to touch his cheek, and finding them too numerous to count. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, the gesture as meaningful now as it had been when they were first falling in love. "Funny coincidence," he said. "I was doing the exact same thing." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long golden rays across the valley that had become their home, Alina offered a silent prayer of thanks for the twist of fate that had brought her to the county fair that day, and for the brave cowboy who had stopped a terrible injustice and, in doing so, changed both their lives forever. In the distance, the ranch bell rang, signaling dinner time. Together, the Graysons walked toward the house, toward the future they continued to build, with each passing day a future rooted in love, strengthened by adversity, and nurtured by the land that had brought them together.